Hi, I'm Travis from Zero Industries. In this insight, we're going to go through design requirements that are coming out within Edition 6. So we're talking specifically around 60,079 Part 14, and we're going to talk about the documentation requirements and design requirements. So if we go down into the contents, now as you can see, this is a major rewrite, as I've made mention in previous insights. So typically 4.2 was documentation requirements. That's now been moved to now point 5 within documentation. So we want to go over the requirements for documentation, and we're going to talk about what the general requirements are, and we've covered on the verification dossier requirements in a previous insight, but then we want to talk about the site information, the EX equipment information, and the installation information, because we're not going to touch on personal competency yet. So if we go down to page 34, this is out a couple because of the requirements or just because of the licensing that covers up a couple of pages. So if we go into documentation, we've spoken about the requirements for a verification dossier. Now, so within the verification dossier, what do we want to see? So in the edition 5, it said may contain, it had examples of what information you could see housed within a verification dossier. Hazardous area classification documents, that's always going to be in there. Your assignment of EPLs required. So if it's not according to table 4, so that means if you've got any deviation from your EPLs, the risk assessment that then showcases how you've deviated from your standard EPL relationship to zones will be in there, and why, the rationale behind it. Any identified external influences, the ambient temperature range, any control measures applied for the use of non-EX equipment in exceptional circumstances. So with this, your control measures deal with, say you've got active gas detectors within your installation, or you've got EXV as a control measure. It will deal with the rationale behind that. So what the safety mechanisms are, how that ties into it, where they're located, what the redundancy is for those particular installations, and also the evidence of competency of persons or parties who carried out design, selection, installation, and initial inspection. So your site information will house like your basically your training competency package. Now, if we go into EX equipment information, we want to see the EX equipment certificate. So in Australia, that would be through the IECEX system. It would also include any conformity assessment documents for any ATEX selected equipment. You'd also have like AUSIEX and ANZ-EX as well, if they're applicable. Your manufacturer's instructions, so your specification documents, your descriptive system documents for your intrinsically safe systems, so that's your entity calculations, your loop impedance for those, like your circuit identification for that, any relevant calculations of information, for example, EXE terminal arrangements, and the purging rates for pressurized equipments or rooms, if applicable, information for maintenance or repair to meet the requirements of Part 17 and Part 19 respectively. Within Australia, that will most likely also include AS 3800. Now, your installation information, this is where it changes a fair bit. So we're seeing documents demonstrating how specific condition used for EX equipment have been met. Now, that wasn't in edition 5. That was a requirement from a checklist on Part 17. So now we want to see how the design demonstrates, or you can have a design that will then demonstrate how the specific conditions of use have been met for the EX equipment. Now, those conditions of use vary from manufacturer and application. So some may require the particular housing of barrier glands, need to have a particular IP rating. So then it would go back, you would see that within the marshalling box or the switchboard arrangement or the enclosure arrangement of where that particular barrier, Xena barrier or isolation, galvanic isolator are. So you would see that represented in the design criteria. The documentation relating to the suitability of the EX equipment for the area environment, which is exposed through a validation report. For example, temperature ratings, type of protection, degree of protection, your IP, and your corrosion resistance. The plan showing types and details of the wiring systems and the cable routing. That's another one as well. Cable routing was excluded. It's now included. The records of selection criteria for cable entry systems and conduits. That's another one that's been added as well. For compliance with the requirements for the particular type of protection. Drawings for the conduit installation and the location of seals. So if you have any kind of like breathing apparatus within your conduits, whether you have like where your conduits are, any of the seal gaskets as they enter or penetrate, drawings and schedules relating to circuit identification, and the records of the initial inspection, which is pretty much stock standard. So what we're seeing within the installation package, or we're seeing broadly speaking within Edition 6, we're seeing an actual defined requirement around the hazardous area design that has been missing from previous editions. What we're seeing within Australia, or what we have seen previously, is that design portion has been missed out completely from the hazardous area package. The hazardous area consultant, or the person that's done the classification, will provide the classification, and then that just gets handballed to the contractor, and the contractor needs to design it according to or needs to install it according to the classification. And what we've missed is this whole, who's responsible for the design? Is it the classifier? Is it a third-party designer, or is it the electrical contractor or the mechanical contractor that's doing their associated works? But with Edition 6, what we're seeing is there is a defined language and defined set of roles, responsibilities, and requirements for a design consultant to be engaged, an electrical engineer to go through and design the hazardous area system for the electrical components. And then depending on, like, for example, if it's in a dust atmosphere and it's risk associated with mechanical ignition sources, then you would get a suitably qualified mechanical engineer to design the interfaces around how they're reducing that mechanical ignition risk. So this is really good language. It's a testament to the team that puts this together, and it's showing us where the industry is headed, so that we will have defined roles for a person that's done the classification, then who's responsible for the hazardous area design, who's responsible for the actual installation, who's responsible for the initial inspections, and then also who's going to be responsible for the verification dossier. So now we'll talk in further insights about conflict of interest and how that relates to the Australian framework. And that's more to do with government regulation and legislation, because there are some governments that have got it really well defined, who can do what part of the project, what they can do, what they can't do, and what their boundary limitations are. So I hope to see you there for that particular insight. And until such time as I see you again, please be safe.